Welcome everyone who's joining to this webinar, this conversation today with Wilson Lau. And as you're joining, it would be great if you can introduce yourself in the chat. Let us know where you're joining us from and what brings you here. And yeah, welcome. And we will get started. I'm gonna just introduce the webinar. It's, as you know, if you signed up, it's three generations of sourcing. And I'll be speaking with Wilson Lau, who's the president of NuHerbs. But before we jump into that, just a couple of other upcoming webinars, trying to plan further in advance. On November 17th, I'll just be back from a month in Nepal, and I'll be speaking with Stefan Gaffner, who's the science officer at ABC. He'll be interviewing me that time. And I'll be talking about the trip in Nepal. We're looking at a Jatamansi Fair Wild project, and also some projects where different companies are collaborating to work in the communities where they're sourcing herbs. So that will be November 17th. And then after that, I've scheduled a series of webinars where we're really trying to get in a little bit more to some of the nuts and bolts of certain challenging issues. One is around data and what is known and not known about how many herbs are wild harvested, how many are cultivated, how many are organic. And so I'll be talking with Joseph Brinkman and possibly some other speakers. The date, we're still deciding the date for that. Joseph has just come out with a recent report that updates data on how many herbs are cultivated. So he'll be talking about what it takes to get that kind of information. And then I've organized two separate webinars that are talking about certifications, which are valuable and complicated, and they're challenging for certifiers, they're challenging for producer groups, they're challenging for collectors and farmers. And so I'll be trying to bring in different voices to talk about those issues. And the information on dates and registration for those will all be on the Sustainable Herbs Program website. And as always, these webinars are made available for free through the generous support of Sustainable Herbs Program members, donors, and underwriters. You can find out more information at the Sustainable Herbs Program website. And they're also made available for free through the support of ABC members. You can find out more information about how to join ABC at herbalgram.org. So with that, I want to stop sharing and introduce Wilson. And I want to, can you all see Wilson on the screen? Yeah, he wasn't on my screen. So Wilson, who most of you probably know, but Wilson is the president of NuHerbs, and he's the third generation in his family to lead NuHerbs, which is a leading Chinese ingredient supplier and TCM practitioner product supplier. Wilson has been on the American Herbal Products Association Board of Trustees since 2008 and held various leadership roles within that organization. He was honored with the APA Hero Award, which recognizes individuals who make outstanding contributions to APA in 2020. And he participates in botanical sustainability initiatives in China. So it's a real honor to have you here, Wilson, and I'm really looking forward to just digging in a little bit and learning more about both your experience sourcing herbs from China and also just to shed a little bit of light on the industry in China. And yeah, so welcome.
Thanks for having me on, Anne. And I look forward to our discussion today. It's always so delightful to talk to you about these topics.
Great. So maybe to begin, can you just talk a little bit about, starting with your experience? You were in third generation in this company. Can you talk some about that and what it was like growing up in a world that was sourcing herbs from China?
Yeah, I think I grew up in the business, literally. We started in 1979, and I was a wee lad then. And I was just thinking about it this morning. My impression growing up of herbs before I actually started going to the fields was that, you know, everything was nice and dried and came in nice, neat boxes. And, you know, it was an indoor activity. And that's because I grew up in an herbal pharmacy. And the reason we started importing herbs ourselves was because we couldn't find the quality of herbs that we wanted for the lineage of practice that my grandmother comes from, which uses ultra low dosage. So really you need high quality herbs to ensure efficacy.
And so keep going. So what, how do they begin to do that? And around what year is this?
Yeah, this is probably soon after we started in the early 80s, a couple of years afterwards, we started importing herbs. And then everything still, Communist China was still sort of, the doors were closed and everything still had to go through Hong Kong until the mid 80s. As soon as the doors opened, we went from Hong Kong directly into China. My mom actually went to northern China, although we're Southerners, and started in Jilin province, which is almost as far as north in China as you go without entering North Korea or Russia. So we started out in northern China, and we started, over the years, we had 3 to 4 different factories in China, everything from extraction to herb processing. So we have seen it from the ground up. And I remember my first trip into the fields versus my trips now into the fields. It's like day and night. I remember when I was maybe 11, 12, people were still, using ox and donkeys to pull carts. And now, I don't know the last time I saw a donkey-led cart anywhere in China.
Mhm.
So it's been quite an experience.
So how say a bit more about how they went about finding the connections. And when you said we had 3 or 4 extraction houses, did that mean you partnered with extraction houses or you started them? Or
We started, we had an extraction facility, we had a processing facility. Our first factory was in Shenzhen, China, and now what is known as Hankou, which is like the busiest part of Shenzhen almost. So the factory there was in the middle of it. And then we still have a factory up in Anhui province, and it is a processing facility. We have since, basically mothballed it because we have found working with partners better environmentally and also for the quality of the herbs versus pulling it back to one central location. So if you want to go back in history, I think that's what you're really asking, is when China first opened up, sourcing herbs was very easy, very, very easy. I hate to say it that way, but it was almost like the golden era of sourcing herbs. And the reason I say this is because they were all government ran, provincial led companies. So every province had its one designated herb company. So everyone was really buying herbs, different quality herbs, but as everyone's buying from one company. And as China opened up, these government ran companies, medical companies started, losing sway to, the privately ran companies and farmers and whatnot. So they start losing power, probably I would say around the early 2000s. They start, really moving from that state ran model to more of a distributed model where there was a lot of different competitors and players in the industry. But, before then, it was really easy. Quality was great because everything had to meet a certain standard. Whether you agree with sulfiting or not, back then it wasn't an issue. Now it is an issue, but it's very clean, right? It's because they have one set of rules and everyone has to follow them.
and so, and your parents are over there, well, I think, or your mother,
Yeah.
your father was a practitioner, was, and your
My
mother,
father is a herbalist, yes, he is, and
Okay.
he's still practicing out of Oakland, California.
okay. And you talk about the values and the legacy of that company, and what was kind of the framework of what they were looking for in finding herbs, or what have you taken from that?
Yeah, I think, what it is what I think China is a huge country, and I think people just don't really understand the breadth and depth of how big China is. So we're Southerners by lineage, or I should say, that's where our family's from. And the further you move away from Beijing, and we use that as a central point, whether it's south, north, east, or west, the further you move away from the center, the more regional substitutions there were. So if you really think about it, it makes sense, right? Before transportation, proper storage, it was really hard to move things far away from these areas where these herbs were grown. Ginseng's always been traded from north to south because it's really precious and it was really hard to get and really powerful herb. But for a lot of these things, a lot of herbs, it may not have been worth it, or the volume used was too much to really enable or facilitate that transit. So when we, as in America, the Cantonese, aka what I call Southerners, were the predominant immigrants into the US. So a lot of the regional substitutions came with them as well. But my family, although traces his lineage to the south, my grandmother trained in Shanghai and comes from more of that official lineage of TCM, and using less regional herbs, using the official herbs that we today find in the Chinese pharmacopoeia. So part of it was quality. Part of it was, you can buy certain qualities, you can buy A, B, C, D, E, F, G, because Chinese herbs are really heavily graded, especially in the past. Less so nowadays, but previously there was really a huge grading selection and qualities and grades of herbs.
Can I interrupt? Can I ask you a question about that? Can you just, for those of us without a deep understanding of the nuances of that grading, can you just add a sentence or two explaining that?
Yeah, grading was dependent on a variety of factors, and it's so nuanced. Like, it's one sentence is a generalization won't do it justice, but just to give you a flavor of what we're talking about, it could be based on the size of the herb, the age of the herb, what parts of the herb it comes from, and how close to it was, and how it was processed. So I think the easiest thing that we can all sort of understand is cinnamon. There's different grades of cinnamon, and the cost you pay is different based on the quality of the cinnamon, right? That's one type of grading system. Another one is vanilla, right? There's different grades of vanilla, and the cost differently, and the aromatics and the flavor of the different grades is very noticeable. So I think it's that kind of thing that goes on, but for each herb, it's so individualized that we can't throw it in a general sense. But this is sort of the things that we sort of would grade herbs on. And some things we still need to use grades on, but for a lot of things, it was based on shape and size, which are less important today.
So I interrupted you. You were talking about what they were looking for and the importance from the TCM tradition of quality in the pharmacopoeia. Yeah.
So quality is talking about the grades, right? And then also we were my grandmother was accustomed to using a lot of these herbs that were found north of current day Guangdong, or formerly Canton province, where there's a lot of regional substitutions. So we also had to bring in the right, quote unquote, the official herb in the pharmacopoeia to sort of satisfy her practice. So I think that was part of it. One is quality, and one is actually the type of herb that was used. Although the common name might be the same, the scientific name is a different species, and the actions is a little slightly different, although maybe interchangeable.
Mm-hmm. I want to interrupt for one thing. There's some comments that it's hard to hear you. Can you turn your sound up maybe?
Yep.
Or maybe speak closer to the microphone.
Yeah, I will definitely do that.
Great, thanks. And so then say a bit more about, so what, as you understood, what goes into what makes that higher quality? So some of it's in the plant, but then some of it's how it's handled. And so what was it that your mother, or whomever, was actually going and looking for the herbs? What was she looking for?
And every herb, it's different. I get back to that. It is so individualized. But, for example, right now, there is, we'll just give you an example of ginseng, right? Right now, most ginseng is grown 3 to 4 years in the ground. Well, you can grow it for 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 years, or even longer. Wild American ginseng, if you look at the ringlets, some of these pieces of ginseng are over 100 years old. So I think, in ginseng sense, is like the age of the root, right? And how it was, and how long it's been in the ground, right? Is one measure, and that's measure will increase the potency or the potency of the root. And I think the other thing that, as you mentioned, our dear friend Joseph Brinkman earlier, one of the things his comments is, and I think is so true, is that, hey, back then the quality of herbs were a lot better because a lot of the stuff was wild crafted and it sat in the ground for a long time. And as my other dear friend, who is a pharmacology professor in China, will tell you, that's not the true. We never have really actually charged for the true value of herbs if we were looking at those herbs, because they sat in the ground for so long and they were nature's gift to us, right? So what we're growing today, quality wise, for on average, is nothing like what we were using previously in maybe 20, 30, 40 years ago. But we are where we're at, and quality now is looked at. A lot of it used to be looked at through macroscopic analysis, and now we have gone from macroscopic to microscopic to TLC, HPTLC. So we have a lot of more tools to sort of look for things that are specific to us, especially as a lot of companies are moving from what I call whole herbalism to chemistry specific herbalism. So we're looking at, a lot of people are looking for specific compounds, colors, and we're just using a very small part of that plant. Whereas traditionally, our traditional herbalism, we're looking at the whole plant and the benefits the whole plant can bring. And some people have dedicated their careers to studying one plant and they haven't even gotten but beyond the surface layer of it. So they're wonderful, complex gifts from nature, right? So I think it's really about, how do you view herbalism and how do you view quality, right? Because quality can mean a lot of different things to a lot of different people. For example, I'm working on a project where they just want one phytochemical out of it. And, is it better in the future to even not grow it, but synthesize that chemical? And that's where we get into modern drugs, or even botanical drugs. We'll keep that for a different day. But I think quality is dependent on your use and how you measure it. And that's why it's very important. When we talk about quality, we think about, one, the practitioners who we serve, and then two is like the manufacturers and what is it fit for their purpose when we're sourcing on their behalf. It's like, hey, is this really what you need and want? And that also will contribute to them using less resources because it's fit for their specific purpose versus some other purpose.
Well, it's interesting, as someone who's kind of in between, and you listening to practitioners and the manufacturers, and then how about your own, what are the things that are important to you that you bring as NuHerbs to that?
We have a system of where we call it Ai Cao Yao, which is love herbs, right? For lack of, sort of roughly translates the love of herbs, and we really think about, sustainability, quality, testing, safety. And these are things that matter to us. And, I am personally more agnostic to quality. And what I mean by that is that I understand that different people have different needs when it comes and define quality differently. Back to the example, the practitioners want one thing, and I got to provide that to that segment. The flavor people may want another thing, and we have to really be cognizant of what they want. And the drug people may want a whole different thing, and the supplement side of things want a third thing. So I don't just use one definition of quality, but I think safety, potency, and sustainability is all across all segments is going to be essential the same, but quality is defined differently across different customer base segmentations.
How about for you, when you're thinking of sustainability, what does that mean? Unpack that a little bit. What does that mean in terms of the practices you're promoting and looking for? And
so that's a real good question, right?
Yeah.
And I think I have a podcast called Herbal Explorations, and season 2 is coming up, and it's all going to be on sustainability, and we'll really do a deep dive into that. But for me, sustainability at first meant, when we first started this, or when I first started in the business, sustainability really was, hey, can this herb be used sustainably? Meaning that we're not going to impact the native population of this herb and put it into extinction, right? That was used to be really easy, right? Like, don't overuse this herb. This herb's on the list. Don't use it, or find a way to use it, or find a way to move it from wild harvest into cultivation, right? And that was the first layer, right? And then the second layer becomes, as we keep going into what sustainability is, well, now we're looking at, hey, are the inputs we're using, can we be better on that, right? Can we use the outputs more efficiently, right? And I think that's, and can we move things from point A to point B more efficiently even? So I think sustainability is too broad of a term almost, like it encompasses everything. So we don't really understand what we are talking about anything in particular. So I think, I like to break sustainability up into, components, right? And when I really talk about herbs and, just the growing of the herbs, that's really about, are we using the right inputs, and are we, taking care of the soil, the environment that that the herbs are being cultivated or wild crafted in. And back to your original topic of your trip, Fairwild has a great framework to sort of do that kind of analysis for wild crafted herbs, and their system is robust, and I really love it. And we're trying to get a project, a Fairwild Schisandra, Northern Schisandra project up and running in China. Hopefully, that was supposed to be a 2022 project, but I think it'll be a 2023 project. Fingers crossed if nothing major happens.
And then, well, so just keep talking, because so whatever the right word is, I agree, sustainability is not a very useful word, but in terms of the sourcing, and you've talked about long-term commitments, what kind of things do you look for in establishing partnerships with where you're getting the herbs to make sure that all your needs are getting met, you're getting the quality you need, and they're getting.
Yeah, I think, again, our company was really built on partnerships, and we value our partners, and we value long-term partnerships. And the thing that is important about partnerships is sustainability and multi-year relationships is trust, and the ability for a person or a company to say, I believe that this person is going to do what they say. Because, this is international business. You can sue them, but, who wants to go through the legal system? It's going to take forever. The projects might not be worthwhile to be sued or involve lawyers. So I think it's trust, right? It's what can I rely on this person and what they're saying, and will they come through, right? So we could have been a lot larger business today if we were more loosey-goosey. And what I mean by that is, hey, go ahead and plant it. It'll be great. We'll go sell the olive for you. Don't worry about it. We'll take it all, right? And that's not how we do things. Like we're really upfront about it. Like, hey, this is what we think we can do. This is what we can deliver, and let's do it this way, right? So I think, but then, what it does allow us is we build credibility and trust amongst our partners, our farmers, our wild collectors. So when we ask for something, and this is what sustainability is, right? It is at origin, you're making ask. You're asking them to change what they do. You're asking them to decrease their yield. You're asking them to do more work, right? And sure, you're going to compensate them for that, right? But at the same time, they have to believe that it's worthwhile, right? Because you can be like, hey, I'm going to pay you extra. Well, are you really going to pay me extra? Are you really going to take this stuff if it looks, it doesn't look pretty and like, things that are non-organic, right? These are all things that people have to believe, right? You know, Even if I put in money for organic certification, you know, am I going to pay that organic premium? Am I going to take it? Is there a marketplace for it? Because they don't know what's happening in the US or Europe or wherever it ends up going. So it's all about trust. And a lot of the partners we have worked for 20, 30 years, almost since the beginning of our business. Um, our QA, our person in charge of QA in China, started off with us maybe 30 years ago as as a factory manager of our processing facility. So he understands the company culture, what is demanded, what our expectations are, and that message gets reinforced with our partners by him because we're not there every day, right? But he is. So it's very important to have alignment in your partners, your employees, and the people that act on your behalf. So I think, a dialogue and talking to them and really understanding what they need. Um, Currently, I'll tell you something that is really interesting about the Chinese market. I think the market worldwide, right? As interest rates creep up and as the economy may not be doing as well, a lot more growers are asking for money up front because they may not have it. And it's like, well, that's part of his trust as well, right? If I give you the money, I trust that you'll deliver to the best of your ability, right? And so there's a lot of trust involved. But I think with interest rates and the cost of money no longer being free and the economy slowing down, there's going to be a lot more needs from the farmers for different things, especially if interest rates keep climbing and the weather keeps being uncooperative with these extreme climate events. That's another aspect of sustainability, right? Is the climate, right?
There's so many things in there. I want to ask you a little more about it. I'd love, before in another setting, you'd also talked about that cultural exchange in between, say, when you're buying and with the farmers or producers. And I think of, say, around certifications, which is a lot of demands that were coming in from outside. And I wonder if you have any stories or examples of how you've navigated that balancing of the demands, requirements you're trying to meet, and honoring and respecting the challenges that farmers are facing. And I don't know, or the lessons you've learned or how you all navigated that. I don't know.
Well, I think a lot of it is that we as a company and me personally, um, I'm able to navigate it because we're firmly rooted on both sides of the world or in different cultures. So I understand when Americans say, I need this. I understand what the Chinese mean by I need that. So it's really about having effective cross-cultural communications, right? And I think a lot of it's just really getting down to it and not just accepting yes or no at face value, or we can or can't at face value. I'll give you a perfect example about certification and things that you learn over time. Like when we first started this stepping into the organic world, You go to the farmer and say, or a partner say, hey, anyone that's doing this, doing organic growing farming. Yeah. And then, I know this guy down the street or down the road or that's doing organic. And you're like, oh, great. Right. And then you go talk to the person. You're like, oh, yeah, I'm doing organic. I'm certified. Okay. Certified to what organic standard? The Chinese organic standard, Japanese, EU, US, Canadian, there's so many organic standards. We think of organic being monolithic, but the reality it's a standard and there's different standards all around the world. So they were telling the truth. Absolutely. They were certified organic, just not NOP organic. So that's part of like what we're talking about is like, let's have clarity and really asking questions in a respectful manner and not saying like, hey, that's not organic. Well, it is, right? It's just not what the organic certification that we want, right? And really understanding how to partner with them and educating them. There's even like, they might not understand that if they're certified to Chinese organic standards and their world is only China, well, how would they know that there's other standards and they may differ and why it may be beneficial and why we need, right? Why would anyone want a different standard? It's like, why can't you just go use this somewhere else? And I think that's the key is not only with certifications, but also with quality and adulteration, right? I think a lot of times people get painted with a bad rap, or a country gets cornered with a bad thing, is because people aren't clear about what they want. Right? Hey, I want hibiscus. Well, there's a lot of species of hibiscus. If the buyer wasn't clear, I want satirifa. Well, you can, if I give you a different species of hibiscus, then it's still hibiscus, right? I'm not wrong, but it's not the one that you want. But it will come in as adulterated or as adulterant because of that unclarity, right? Like, I think, I'm not saying that adulteration and cheating doesn't happen, but I think there is this communication issue, like elderberries. Even with elderberries, there's lots of different species. If you weren't specific to what type you wanted, then if they gave you different species, yes, it's adulteration, but was on purpose or not, right? I think that's the key, is really getting understanding of clarity, understanding about what it is. And I think as an industry with spec sheets and CGMPs, we're a lot more clear nowadays about exactly what we want. But in the past, it wasn't uncommon to just say, hey, I want licorice. Well, here's licorice.
While you're on that around adulteration, there's a lot of impression and about herbs, as you were saying, country from China, that a lot of adulterated herbs are coming from there, or high pesticide residue. Can you paint a little bit of a picture for those of us who know very little about the variation? Like, I've been told you can get the best herbs and the worst herbs from China. So
yeah, and you can, right? And part of that is grading, right? Quality, and asking and knowing what you want. Those are all very important, right? When I started in this business, one of my mentors told me, little brother, doesn't matter what herb it is, just name a price and you can find it at that price. Well, you think about that statement. That's probably maybe the hyperbole. You won't be able to find it for a penny, right? But basically the message is, hey, at a price point, almost at any price point, herbs deliverable at some quality. And I think the key is, that's the key, right? Is what is the quality, right, of the herb? And I think a lot of times is if we're driven only by price and we're not very clear on what our standards and specifications are, you'll get a really crappy herb, right? Like, I think on the whole herb side, that's really true, right? Is like, are you getting just the fragments and bits and pieces that are left over from me cutting these big, beautiful pieces for my practitioner customers. And, here's like, basically it's leftovers, right? Like it is what it is, right? So I think the question is really, hey, what's your specification? Is it good? Is it good quality for your purpose? And do you need it, right? And people, when you're not clear about it and you just worry about price, well, yeah, right. Like you can buy, we'll just say apples, right? You can buy apple for 50 cents a pound up to, these specially farmed apples from Japan to, hundreds of dollars a pound. Well, which apple do you want?
Yes, and are there, we also hear about, say, pesticide residue from the heavy metals in the soil and things like that. Is that similar? Like certain regions are the environment, or how do you think about ensuring that the herbs you're getting are going to be within the limits of what your company decided?
Yeah, so I think first of all, right, and I think this is a a lot of adulteration in the past and a lot of failures in the past, and not so much today, because again, we have lots more stringent standards and SOPs, and because of CGMPs and the Food Safety Modernization Act, we were talking about the food side of things and the supplement side of things, we have CGMP, right? So I think it's very essential that in the past, what we're really talking about is the past, right? And not today. Today, when you do it, is because there's a failure, right? But in the past, when people's, they just said, I need licorice, or I need ginseng, or I need astragalus. Well, that's it. They never tested for it, right? And they didn't understand that there's these things that need to meet certain standards for the US market. But as Americans, and when I'm talking about Americans, it could be Europeans, whoever it is that they have their own their standards in their country. But if you don't relay that and you just assume that everything meets our standards, that's not the case, right? So we have to do testing. We have to be clear about what we want and how to find it, right? I think these are all things that a lot of things that came to be, and the bad rap is especially when there's large immigration from a country to another country, is that there's a lot of people that may not be experts but have their cousin or their brother or their uncle or their cousin's cousin has access to this thing, and they're able to just do business, right? But as we become more sophisticated in what we want and need, these standards have tightened up. And I think a lot of these things that we're talking about today, if properly controlled by the importer, should not exist anymore. And it needs to be legally controlled by the importer nowadays because of the Food Safety Modernization Act and the Foreign Supplier Verification Program. So anything that comes in the country that is non-compliant is something the importer didn't control properly. And always, because we're not dealing with homogeneous goods, right? We're dealing with heterogeneous goods, that things happen, right? There's accidents or things that are not hot spots or whatnot. But overall, it's really the onus is on the importer to confirm that the standards being produced, the goods being produced in the foreign country meet the US requirements. So, blame the importer. And I hate to say that because I'm the importer, but it really is, right? Like you got to know who you're working with, and they understand the US regulatory systems and the quality and the safety that's required by it.
You might have answered this. This is a question. There's a lot of questions, so I'm kind of including them as I talk. This is agreeing with the long-term trust and important of commitment with the suppliers, but wondered how and what kind of testing you do. Well,
for our organic and pharmacopoeia grade herbs, we do a gamut of testing. We test for pesticide residuals, heavy metals, microbacteria, and also if the herb is in the Chinese pharmacopoeia, we test to make sure that it meets the pharmacopoeia standards as far as activity, potency, and quality and identity. But we always test for heavy metals, microbacteria, and pesticides according to the US standard. But quality-wise, we use the Chinese pharmacopoeia.
To the final, the question about testing for the heavy metals and things like that, over the length of time you've been involved in sourcing herbs from China, do you see changes, increasing problems with heavy metals or pesticide residue, or decreasing, or any?
Yeah, I think with heavy metals, it's all about knowing where you source, and that's part of the hazard analysis you need to do. Like, hey, if you're sourcing from, right below the melting, the metal plant, right? The steel plant, probably will have a heavy metal issue. But I think as we get away from leaded gas and all these things that contribute to a, heavy metals at a topical level, like on surface level, I shouldn't say topical, but surface level, a lot of these heavy metal issues are being remedied. But if it's an impacted area or has manufacturing activity nearby, it could cause heavy metal issues. Pesticides is becoming a bigger issue. But with the partners we do work with, we know that we tell them don't apply pesticides and whatnot. I think the key again is communication. Hey, we can't sell it if it has pesticides. We're going to be testing for it. We can't buy it if it doesn't meet the standard.
Are there problems with non-point contamination while they're not using the pesticides, but there's drift coming over?
Drift is an issue, right? But it's not the same issue as in the US. In the US, we do a lot of pesticide spraying by plane. And, you get like this, stuff that comes out, right? The drift that happens there is more localized. So if you set up the proper barriers and having a barrier area, that will help prevent a lot of it. And then also knowing that you're not downstream from a water source that is using pesticides. So it's, again, site selection.
Yeah, I could ask a question about that, but I want to say
Yeah. And then and there's always possible pesticide contamination once it leaves the farm area, during transportation, processing, et cetera, right? But you gotta really be on top of it and really have a good QC QA program to ensure that you're hitting all those things, just like you would do in the US.
And it all drives home the importance of needing to know where your herbs are from. Maybe not me, but you, the person that's doing the buying.
Yeah, it's very essential, right? And I think it's key. It's if you don't know where your source of your herbs are from, then a lot of adulteration can happen. You can't control a lot of things. And with this whole talk about sustainability and carbon gas and carbon emissions, you have to know, in order to do these reports, you have to know where it comes from. Because a lot of this information is starting at scope 1 is starting at origin upstream, right? And if you don't have that data, you'll never get scope 1, numbers, unless you make it up.
Yeah. There's a question, this is in the chat, but about rodenticides, I don't even know that word, and fungicides that may be used in transport.
Yeah, that is always a possibility, right? Again, you have to be clear, right, about don't use it, right? And also making sure to let your logistic providers know you're delivering food, right? Just like here in the US, like when we ship out a pallet, we call our trucking company, or like, hey, this is a food grade shipment. Don't put it with, the chemicals. Same idea, right? You have to know, right? You have to inspect the vehicle, make sure that they didn't send the wrong vehicle. These are all things that doesn't matter whether it is in the US or in China or Europe. You have to be clear and have systems in place to prevent it. No system is foolproof because it relies on people and things always can happen. But if you don't have a system, you for sure will be exposed to these issues.
And this great level of detail. Thank you. And then another Tony Booker said alpha toxins are a major worry. Wondered if you want to comment on alpha toxins.
Yeah, aflatoxins is a worry worldwide, right? Especially as global warming happens. I'll give you a perfect example in the US. Before in the Midwest and the wheat belt, aflatoxins wasn't an issue. But now with global warming, we're seeing issues of aflatoxins. So it's an issue worldwide and in China as well. We test for aflatoxins when we know there is a possibility of it, a high possibility based on our hazard analysis. There's certain herbs in the Chinese pharmacopoeia that require aflatoxin testing, and also what based on our internal data, our conversations with other people and partners, we know sort of which herbs it could be an issue in and which herbs is not an issue in. So aflatoxin testing is done as required.
There's a lot of questions that I'm trying to skim through them, and also wanted to give you a chance to speak. You wanted to talk about freshness and the role of freshness in Chinese herbs and what's important and what's worth understanding.
Yes, I think, freshness and the role of freshness in herbs, period, right? And I think we have to, as users of herbs, especially at scale, and importers of herbs, we have to understand when does freshness really matter and taking that into account, because it will also include the amount of herbs that you have to discard or not use or waste. For something that's aromatic and that requires freshness like mints or something that's very aromatic, then yes, you really have to be worried about freshness. But for something like a dried ginseng root that is pretty whole, I don't know, I haven't done the test, but if I were to do the test, my assumption is if I tested ginseng root from across 4 different years from the same area, that they would all hold up pretty well. And then if I didn't tell you which root was from what year, you'd be hard pressed to be able to categorize which root was from which year based on phytochemical testing. So I think, we want to really be mindful about when it's important, when is freshness important, and not use a broad stroke that might cause waste or, perfectly good herbs being discarded.
Goes back to what you were saying at the beginning, that each herb is very different and you need to understand.
Yeah. And some herbs, the older it is, the better it is. For example, chinpi, which is Chinese tangerine peel, the older the peel is, if stored properly, of course, the caveat, just like wine, if stored properly, the older the peel is, the more valuable it is. And the flavor between a 1-year peel and a 30-year peel, my goodness, it's like day and night.
Kind of building on that, Stefan Gaffner has a question about, is there any medicinal plant wisdom that you can share that you learned from your grandmother?
Yes. Be consistent. and what I mean by that is that, my grandmother lived till 100, and consistency is key with herbalism, health, and vitality. Be committed to it. It doesn't, a little bit every day. Like she'd get up in the morning, do her calisthenics, drink her herbal soups, and really be committed to that lifestyle and health, and really just living the life, right? Like you have to embrace it and live it and do it. And just like anything in life, mastery of anything, you just got to keep doing it over and over and over again and see those incremental improvements, 0.01% improvement a day over, 10,000 days is real change.
And good wisdom for back to what you were saying about long-term commitments and what it takes to make them work.
Yeah.
Being consistent, right? I mean, showing up.
Yeah. A lot of it is just literally showing up and doing and talking and walking the walk, right? And it's, I think a lot of times we think of things in really broad strokes at the end point, right? But a lot of times it's a lot easier than it seems because we just got to do what we need to do at a daily basis to move forward toward that end point. And over the years, you'll be surprised. You'll be like, oh, great, wow, I'm here already. So I think that's the great part about it.
This is kind of a different, going to the much bigger scale question that someone asked. Given the surge in demand for Chinese herbs during the pandemic, how is that impacting that increased pressure on growers and processors? Is that impacting the quality, or do you observe that? Or
yes, I don't think it's the demand that is really impacting quality for the most part, because you have to remember Chinese herbs has a huge market between China and the rest of Asia. The amount that we use of most Chinese herbs is very small in comparison to the total volume. So I think, for most herbs, right, it's a blanket statement. So I think that's, one thing. I don't think that's all of a sudden, we went from a 10,000 tons, 10,000 tons or 10,000 pounds to, 15, big deal. There's plenty of material. But I think with COVID, quality systems have suffered across the world. And I think the reason why, and this is my personal reason, right? I think why is because a lot of institutional knowledge retired at roughly the same time or left at the same time. And it's true of in Europe, the US, and China. You had these people that could retire, but maybe like based on today's lifestyle and health, didn't want to retire yet. So I think that's the key, is like all of a sudden the pandemic came and they stopped working. Well, they're like, forget it. I was going to retire anyways. But all of a sudden it was like a huge wave out the door, right? And the institutional knowledge and the people that were in charge were exiting at a lot quicker rate than at any given particular time, because of this across all countries. So I think the quality suffered not because the increase in demand, but because people were leaving the industry.
that's interesting. Kind of following on that, and especially Eastern Europe, but other parts of the world, you hear about a decline of wildcrafters, or in the US, young farmers. What do you notice in China around? Are there enough? Two questions to this: are there enough wildcrafter? How that's changing? And this is a question: is the marketplace overwhelmingly cultivated, or how much is wildcrafted?
More and more cultivated every day. Every day, every year we're getting more and more cultivation projects up and running, moving things that were traditionally wildcrafted into cultivation. Worldwide trend: less farmers, less wildcrafters everywhere in the world, including China. China's demographic is aging. And so the people that are moving to the cities to work, the young people, well, that means that they're not back home in the farms or the villages to do the wildcrafting. Farming, I think, because of the Communist Revolution and how land was divided or allocated, a lot of the farming in China was very inefficient because they were happening on small plots. Is there opportunity now to sort of take 20, 30 small plots and make a bigger plot to get efficiencies? So instead of needing 50 people to farm, can we get 5 or 10 people to farm? I'm seeing some efficiencies on that scale, right? Like where we're taking, or using a co-op model or whatever it may be. So I think that's part of it, is like, yes, there is a drain of farmers and wildcrafters, but in China, because of history and how these small plots were allocated, those big plots were divided into small plots, there's chances for efficiencies to go back to a bigger scale farming. Not huge, I don't want to think like, farming wheat or corn where you just mow with your tractors, but really about hey, we can now get some efficiencies. We don't need everyone just working on their individual little plot.
We have about 5 more minutes. There's a number of different questions that kind of relate to what, as customers buying products, or as a, I'd say also a company, what to look for in terms of quality, and that to know that the herbs have really been cared for, the relationships have been cared for, the plants have been cared for.
I think the only way to do this, right? And I say this to everyone, is that know who your partners are, who your suppliers are, and what are they doing to ensure this, right? If you're not the one at the ground level or field level or at the factory, you really have to get insight into how they're providing and guaranteeing these things that are important to you, and ask the right questions, right? You can't just assume that it's getting done, right? We can't make these assumptions, right? If sustainability is important to you in scope 1, more specifically, if scope 1 is important to you, how are you going to get that data? How are they getting the data, right? And how can you know the data is reliable, right? And these are conversations. These aren't just like, hey, do you have 50 kilos of, or 5,000 kilos of, or 10,000 kilos of X? Yes, I do. At this price, boom, we're done, right? That's not the conversation. It's like, hey, this is important to me. How are you guaranteeing this is great organic? How are you making sure it's processed correctly? What are your safety systems? What are you doing to ensure it? Do you have the knowledge of how to do this or not do this to ensure this happens or doesn't happen? Do you have feet on the ground? To me, I wouldn't, based on my personal experience being in the industry for almost 20 plus years. I can't say 30 yet, but for 20 plus years, like, relationships matter, but even more importantly is like, do the people that you're working with have feet on the ground? How integrated are they really into that particular origin? And who are they dealing with? Are they dealing with traders? Are they buying at the market? Or are they working with farmers and have ability to control and manipulate things that in a manner that it can meet our expectations and your expectations, right? We just can't just send an email and just think everything will just magically align.
Those are such great points. Then there's some questions around the difference, if you have ideas about the difference of quality of herbs grown in China and those grown outside of China.
Yeah. So quality is all about the systems and how you grow it, right? And the microclimates. And for me, if I'm talking about whole herbalism, I have to go back to Didal Yaocai, which translates to geoauthentic herbs. So we have to respect the microclimates that these were grown traditionally in, because we don't know all the chemistry in it that makes it work the way that we expect. So you can take a herb and grow it somewhere else, and it might even be really potent if you look at the active chemical. Give me one sec. Active chemical, and really understand what you're looking for. So if you're looking for color, right? I really want this intense hue of red or blue. Yeah, you can grow it anywhere as long as you can hit that standard of red or a certain chemical constituent. But if you're looking at whole herbalism, that's a whole different thing. We got to go back to geoauthenticity, because we don't have those markers that we're specifically looking at, because we don't understand that herb from a chemical or testing analysis viewpoint deep enough to really substitute that traditional knowledge and experience for something else.
That's a great answer. One final question. It's my question. You've done this so long, you've grown up in it. What parts do you love the most about it?
I love the people. I love the people and working with people and helping people make their dreams happen, right? Like, working with the farmers is like really getting them, access to doing what they love and growing quality materials, supporting them in doing that. And with my, partners like in China is really like having that stable relationship, building the business up together. And for my customers is really saying, hey, this is what you need. I'm providing it to you in a timely fashion, in a value fashion, and really giving them what they need and want, and really understanding that. And one of the things that we launched in the last 2 years, our NuHerbs Bespoke Extract program, where we're taking the botanicals that we source and know the origin of and transforming into ingredients specific and tailored for our customer. That's like, that links everything together, like all the partnerships and creating value for the whole ecosystem. That's what I love about it, is really, making things better for everyone. And hopefully, with the new focus in sustainability, environmentalism, and the need to do something positive on that front, we'll be doing a lot more work with our partners at origin and our partners that are selling it via brands or practitioners, and really doing a lot more of this work and really making a dent on that and our contribution on that part of the business and the world.
Thank you so much. This has been so, it's rich, and I love the cultural part that's really come forward, both with you and in plants and herbalism itself, much more than typical sort of talk about the industry. There have been a lot more questions than I could get to. I tried to include the ones that sort of touched on bigger themes.
And if anyone has any questions or wants to reach out, you can just email me at wilson@nuherbs.com. Be more than happy to connect and see what we can do to answer the questions that you have that we didn't get to, or you just want to chat about this and sourcing herbs from China or about herbal extracts from China, feel free to reach out as well.
Great. Thank you all. And thank you, Wilson.
Thank you so much for having me on. It was a pleasure.
Yeah. So Wilson, you can.
Yeah.